Billionaire CEO's baby cried nonstop on the plane, until a poor black waitress did the unthinkable. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into today's incredible story. It was the kind of scene that seemed like something out of a movie. A luxurious flight, high above the clouds, where the wealthy and powerful sat in their first-class seats, sipping champagne and enjoying the finer things in life. Among them was a billionaire CEO, Richard Langston, known for his cold demeanor and razor-sharp business mind. He had built his empire from the ground up, and he was used to getting what he wanted when he wanted it. But today was different. As the plane hummed steadily through the sky, something unexpected happened. His baby, a young toddler no older than 2, began to cry, and cry, and cry. The piercing sound echoed through the cabin, filling the air with tension. Richard's face tightened in frustration as he looked at his wife, who was doing her best to soothe their child. But no matter what she tried, the baby's cries only grew louder. It wasn't just the sound of a distressed child. It was the sound of Richard Langston's composure beginning to crack. The passengers around him shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some trying to ignore the noise, others exchanging glances, clearly uncomfortable with the interruption. Richard, however, was growing more and more irritated. His hand gripped the armrest, his knuckles turning white. He glanced around, his eyes scanning the flight attendants. They were doing their best to keep the situation under control, but nothing seemed to be working. That's when he snapped. He looked up at the nearest flight attendant, a young black woman named Naomi Carter. She had been serving drinks and attending to passengers' needs, moving with quiet efficiency. Richard's voice cut through the cabin. Can someone do something about this? My baby is crying nonstop, and I am paying for a first-class experience. This is unacceptable, he said sharply, his words laced with the arrogance of someone who believed his wealth could solve every problem. Naomi stood still for a moment, her heart sinking. She had heard the tone before, rich, entitled, condescending. She had seen it in the eyes of many passengers who treated her like she was invisible, a mere part of the service staff. But today, this was different. She wasn't just another flight attendant. She was a mother, too. Naomi had worked in this job for years, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Her life had been filled with struggle, from growing up in a rough neighborhood to raising her young daughter on her own. She knew what it felt like to be dismissed, to be underestimated. But she also knew that sometimes, it only takes a moment to turn everything around. Naomi took a deep breath and walked toward Richard's seat, her heels clicking softly against the floor. As she approached, Richard's irritation was palpable. He glanced at her, his eyes filled with impatience. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely masking his frustration. Naomi looked down at the baby in Richard's arms. She could see the little one was exhausted, overwhelmed by the noise and the unfamiliar environment of the plane. She knew that kind of distress well. She had seen it in her own daughter. Sir, if you'll allow me, I think I can help, Naomi said quietly, her voice steady. Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. And what exactly do you think you can do? He asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Naomi didn't flinch. She smiled softly and reached out her arms, asking to hold the baby. Richard hesitated for a moment, then handed the child over with a dismissive wave. Naomi gently cradled the baby in her arms, and as she did, she began to softly hum a lullaby, a song her grandmother had sung to her when she was a child. It was a simple tune, one that carried a sense of warmth and comfort. As Naomi continued to hum, something incredible happened. The baby's cries began to soften, then slow, until finally, the child fell asleep in her arms. Richard watched, stunned. The entire cabin fell silent as passengers looked on in awe. Naomi, the young black waitress, had done what no one else on the plane could do. She had calmed the child with nothing more than a song and a quiet presence. Richard's jaw tightened as he realized that, for the first time, someone else had taken control of a situation he thought he could dominate. The other passengers were equally stunned, their eyes wide with disbelief. Naomi returned the baby to Richard, her movements calm and deliberate. As she handed the child back, she locked eyes with Richard, a quiet but powerful moment of recognition passing between them. She didn't need to say anything. Her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. Richard sat back in his seat, his expression unreadable. He had been humiliated, not by the child's cries, but by the woman he had underestimated. Naomi, on the other hand, had gained something far more valuable than a simple apology or recognition. She had reclaimed her power, and in that moment, she had proven that no one, no matter how wealthy or powerful, could control her. I have to admit, Richard Langston was not one to easily accept defeat, especially not in front of a room full of strangers. His face, which had been tight with anger moments before, softened only slightly as Naomi handed him his sleeping baby. The passengers, who had been nervously glancing at one another, were now silent, their eyes still fixed on Naomi. She hadn't just calmed a crying baby. She had done something far more powerful. She had made Richard Langston, the billionaire CEO, realize that for once, he wasn't in control. Naomi returned to her duties, as if nothing had happened, but in her heart, she knew this moment would change everything. No longer just a flight attendant, Naomi Carter had become a symbol of something greater. Richard Langston, however, remained stunned, staring at his baby's peaceful face. His mind raced, replaying the events over and over. What had just happened? How had a woman he thought to be beneath him been able to do something he couldn't? The room was still silent, and the tension was almost palpable. Richard shifted in his seat, feeling the weight of the moment. He glanced around the cabin, hoping to see someone else's reaction, but everyone was too focused on the baby, who was now asleep in his arms. He looked down at Naomi as she moved gracefully through the aisles, attending to other passengers. He had seen her before, of course. He had seen many flight attendants, many people who seemed invisible to him, just part of the scenery. But this time, Naomi wasn't invisible. This time, she had become the focus of everyone's attention. And for the first time, Richard felt uncomfortable in his own skin. As the flight continued, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Naomi had done the impossible. He had seen people like her before, dismissed them, underestimated them. But today, she had shown him that power was not just about money or influence. It was about something deeper, something intangible. It was about presence, about the ability to change the course of a situation with nothing more than quiet strength. After the flight, as Richard walked down the jet bridge with his family, he felt a gnawing sense of unease. He had spent his life building an empire, accumulating wealth, but had he truly understood what it meant to be powerful? Naomi, in her own quiet way, had proven to him that true power was not in wealth, but in the ability to affect others without force. Richard felt the weight of this realization, but he couldn't bring himself to say anything to Naomi. She had already gone back to her duties, and he was left with his thoughts, and the lingering feeling that he had just been schooled by someone he had once dismissed. Days later, the video of the incident would go viral. The footage, captured by a passenger on the flight, showed Naomi's calm demeanor as she soothed the baby, while Richard Langston's frustration was on full display. The public's reaction was immediate. People were in awe of Naomi's grace under pressure, and Richard Langston's reputation took a hit. His company faced backlash, and his competitors couldn't resist pointing out the irony of a billionaire being outdone by a flight attendant. Naomi, on the other hand, received praise and recognition she had never imagined. But she didn't care about the spotlight. She had done what she had always done, helped someone in need. The video wasn't about her. It was about the moment when power shifted, when a woman who had been dismissed as insignificant had taken control of a situation and turned it on its head. Richard Langston, the billionaire CEO, would never forget the lesson he had learned that day. Naomi Carter, the poor black waitress, had shown him what true power really was. I never expected what happened next. Naomi Carter's quiet confidence had made an impression that would echo far beyond that flight. It wasn't just the passengers who were talking about her, it was everyone. The video, which had quickly gone viral, sparked debates across social media. People were amazed by the way she had stepped in, so calm, so composed. But Richard Langston, the billionaire CEO, was still processing the shift that had occurred on that plane. He found himself thinking about Naomi again and again. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had been outdone by someone he had once considered beneath him. What made her different? Why had she been able to do what he couldn't? For the first time in his life, Richard Langston felt the sting of real humility. It wasn't the loss of a business deal that bothered him. It was the realization that power wasn't just about money. It wasn't about influence or control. It was about understanding people, empathy, and being able to change the course of a situation with something as simple as quiet strength. Naomi's act of kindness had shown him that he was missing something fundamental. Days later, Richard reached out to his assistant. "I need to meet her," he said, his voice low. "Naomi Carter, the flight attendant from the other day." His assistant was taken aback. "Sir, are you sure? She's just a flight attendant. She's not part of your world." Richard paused, then replied, "That's exactly why I need to meet her." Set it up. He couldn't explain it, not to his assistant, and certainly not to himself. But something about that woman, the way she had taken control of a situation that could have easily spiraled into chaos, was haunting him. It was like the universe had handed him a lesson in humility, one he wasn't used to. The next morning, Richard was standing in the lobby of a luxury hotel in New York City, waiting for Naomi to arrive. He had arranged for a private meeting. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, but he knew he had to make things right. Naomi arrived on time, dressed in her usual uniform, and was escorted to the meeting room by a hotel staff member. Richard, dressed in his signature tailored suit, stood to greet her. "Miss Carter," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Richard Langston. We met on the plane the other day." Naomi hesitated for a moment, then shook his hand firmly. "Yes, I remember," she said, her voice calm and measured. Richard motioned for her to sit. "I've been thinking about what happened," he began, choosing his words carefully. "And I want to apologize. I realize now that I underestimated you." Naomi raised an eyebrow, but remained silent. Richard continued, "What you did on that plane, it was remarkable. You didn't just calm my child. You did something far more powerful. You showed me that real strength isn't about money or status. It's about compassion, empathy, and the ability to make a difference when it matters most. I've spent my life focused on the wrong things. I've been so wrapped up in my own world that I never really took the time to understand the people around me." Naomi listened intently, her face unreadable. Richard paused, then added, "I want to offer you something. A job. A role in my company. I believe you have something invaluable that my team is missing." Naomi sat back in her chair, her gaze never leaving his. "And why would I want to work for you?" she asked, her voice steady. Richard looked taken aback, but he was quick to recover. "Because I think you could teach me, and my company, something that no business school could. You have a perspective, a way of seeing the world that I don't. And I need that." Naomi considered his words carefully. She had spent her life working hard to make ends meet, but she had also learned the importance of self-respect. She wasn't going to jump at the first offer just because it came from a billionaire CEO. "I'm grateful for the offer," she said, finally speaking. "But I don't need your job. What I do need is for people like you to recognize that we're all more than what we appear on the outside. That we all have value, no matter our position in life. You don't need to hire me to understand that." Richard sat quietly, absorbing her words. There was a long pause, and for the first time, he felt completely out of his element. Naomi was right. He didn't need to offer her a job. What he needed to do was learn. As Naomi stood to leave, Richard stood with her. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "You've already given me more than I could ever repay. I'll never forget what you taught me." Naomi smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that made him feel like he had won something. It was the kind of smile that told him she knew something he didn't. And for the first time in his life, Richard Langston realized that some lessons couldn't be bought, they had to be earned. I'll never forget the day Naomi Carter's life began to shift. After her meeting with Richard Langston, she thought she had seen the last of him. But she was wrong. Weeks had passed since their conversation, and although Naomi had returned to her usual routine, something was different. Richard had kept his promise, not with a job offer, but with something more valuable than that. The world had taken notice of her quiet act of strength, and Richard had helped ensure her story reached far beyond the plane. Naomi had no idea the impact her actions would have. News outlets picked up the story, and it quickly became a sensation. The media's focus shifted from Richard Langston's empire to the unexpected hero. the flight attendant who had changed the course of a moment with nothing but compassion and grace. Naomi's social media began to explode with messages of admiration, and her inbox filled with offers from people who wanted to meet her. But Naomi didn't care about the spotlight. She had always been the kind of person who stayed in the background, doing her best without seeking recognition. Yet, Richard's words had stayed with her. They had struck a chord, one that she hadn't even realized existed. "You could teach me something no business school could." Richard's words echoed in her mind. He had been right about one thing. Naomi had a different perspective on the world, a perspective that was shaped by resilience, empathy, and the kind of humility that most wealthy individuals could never truly understand. She had lived through hardships that people like Richard could only imagine. Raised in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, Naomi had fought for everything she had. And now, she found herself questioning whether her purpose in life was truly to remain in the background. Could she, in fact, do more? Could she teach others, as Richard had suggested? Naomi couldn't shake the idea of it. The more she thought about it, the more the possibility of a different path became real. She had never considered herself someone with power. In her mind, she was just a waitress, a mother, someone doing the best she could to survive. But after that day on the plane, after Richard Langston had truly seen her, Naomi realized that she had something that many others didn't, an ability to influence, to change the course of events with a quiet strength that didn't demand attention. It was subtle, but it was powerful. As time passed, Naomi's influence continued to grow. She was invited to speak at events, to share her story, to talk about the power of empathy, kindness, and the strength of people who had been underestimated. She still worked at the airline, but her role had changed. People looked at her differently now, and she wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was someone with a voice that people were finally listening to. Richard Langston's business was thriving, but the lessons he had learned from Naomi were visible in his decisions. He began to shift the focus of his company. Where once he had valued ruthlessness and ambition above all, he started prioritizing empathy and understanding. He realized that it was the people who were often overlooked, the ones who had struggled, who brought true value to the table. They were the ones who understood what it meant to fight, to survive, and to create lasting change. Richard reached out to Naomi once again. This time, it wasn't to offer her a job. It was to offer her a partnership. He had been so focused on growing his empire that he had missed the opportunity to see the world as it truly was. Naomi had helped him realize that the future wasn't about dominance or control. It was about collaboration, about lifting people up, and about recognizing the value in everyone, no matter their background. Together, they began working on a project that would not only help their businesses, but also empower others like Naomi, people who had been overlooked and underestimated. Naomi had always known that it wasn't about the spotlight. It was about making a difference in the lives of others. And now, as she partnered with Richard to create something greater than either of them could have done alone, she realized that her journey had only just begun. She had always been capable of so much more than she had ever known. She wasn't just a flight attendant anymore. She was a leader, a mentor, and a force to be reckoned with. Richard Langston, once the billionaire CEO who had underestimated her, was now her partner, and together, they were changing the world, one small act of kindness at a time. I never thought it would come to this. Naomi had always been content with her life as a flight attendant. She had never imagined that her life would take such a dramatic turn, but now, months after that fateful day on the plane, everything had changed. Richard Langston, the billionaire CEO, had become more than just a business partner. He had become a confidant, someone who had helped her see the potential within herself that she never knew existed. Together, they had launched a project that was beginning to take shape. It wasn't just a business venture. It was a mission to help people who had been overlooked, people like Naomi. She had spent her entire life working hard, scraping by, trying to make ends meet. But now, with Richard's help, she was in a position to make a real difference. The project they were working on aimed to create opportunities for people from disadvantaged backgrounds, offering them a chance to rise above the circumstances they were born into. It was a bold idea, one that would challenge the norms of the business world, but Naomi was more determined than ever to see it succeed. Richard had transformed from the arrogant CEO who had dismissed her to a man who understood the value of empathy, kindness, and hard work. He had learned to appreciate the kind of strength that Naomi embodied, the quiet but unyielding resolve that came from surviving in a world that often didn't care. As the project gained momentum, the media began to take notice. Naomi was invited to speak at conferences and events, sharing her story and the vision she had for a more inclusive world. She never sought the spotlight, but now, people were listening. Her words resonated with others who had struggled, who had been told they weren't enough. But Naomi was more than just a voice for the unheard. She was a living example of what was possible when someone refused to be defined by their circumstances. Richard, too, found himself at the center of attention. His company was thriving, but it was no longer just about profit. It was about purpose. Naomi had shown him that success didn't have to come at the expense of others. Together, they had proven that empathy and business could coexist, and the results spoke for themselves. The project's impact was far-reaching. People who had never been given a chance were now being trained, hired, and mentored. Naomi had become a symbol of hope for so many, and Richard's company was reaping the rewards of a more inclusive, compassionate approach to business. But success didn't come without its challenges. There were critics, people who couldn't understand why Richard, a billionaire who had made his fortune in tech, was suddenly so focused on social change. They accused him of being opportunistic, of using Naomi's story to boost his image. But Richard didn't care. He knew what they didn't understand. This wasn't about optics or public relations. It was about something bigger. It was about creating a legacy, one where people were valued for their contributions, not their backgrounds. Naomi, too, faced her own battles. Despite her newfound success, she couldn't escape the doubts that crept into her mind. She still struggled with the idea that she wasn't worthy of all the attention. But every time she spoke to a group of young people, every time she saw someone's life change because of the opportunities they had been given, those doubts faded away. She had earned her place at the table. She had fought for it. And now, she was using her voice to make sure others had the same chance. One day, as Naomi and Richard sat in their office, reviewing the progress of the project, Richard turned to her and said, "You know, I never would have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. You've changed everything." Naomi smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that said she had won. It was a smile that acknowledged the hard work, the struggles, and the sacrifices it had taken to get here. "We've changed everything," she replied. Richard nodded. "We've only just begun." And in that moment, Naomi realized that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life. A chapter where she was no longer just a flight attendant, but a force for change, a leader in a movement that was changing the world. One person at a time. I never imagined that a simple moment could have such a ripple effect. Naomi and Richard's project had gained traction far beyond what they had ever hoped for. The impact was undeniable. Their initiative, which had started as a small effort to provide opportunities to the overlooked, was now growing into something massive, something that was changing the lives of people across the country. But with success came new challenges. As the project expanded, so did the scrutiny. There were those who doubted its sustainability, those who believed that people like Richard were only looking for a way to boost their reputations. Some even accused them of using Naomi's story as a marketing tool. Richard had heard the whispers. People questioned whether he was truly committed to the mission or whether he was simply trying to ease his conscience for the past mistakes he had made. He could handle the critics. He had faced far worse in the cutthroat world of business. But what hurt more were the doubts Naomi faced. She had become the face of the movement, but the pressure to constantly prove herself was starting to weigh on her. Naomi was used to working hard for everything she had, but now she had to battle the fear that she wasn't enough, that the attention, the praise, might not be deserved. It was one thing to fight for a seat at the table, but it was another to stay there, knowing that people were watching, waiting for her to fail. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Naomi sat alone in her apartment, her mind racing. She thought about the journey she had been on, how far she had come. From a flight attendant barely scraping by to a leader in a movement that was reshaping the business world. But the doubt kept creeping in. What if they were right? What if she wasn't the right person for this? Richard's call broke through her thoughts. "Naomi, we need to talk." His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that she hadn't heard before. "I'm listening," Naomi said, trying to steady her nerves. "I know you've been feeling the pressure, but I want you to understand something. We're doing something that's never been done before. There will always be critics. There will always be people who question us. But the work we're doing, the people we're helping, that matters. What we're building isn't just about us. It's about creating something that lasts, something that helps people who have been overlooked their entire lives. Naomi let his words sink in. She had heard him say things like this before, but tonight, they felt different. I know you don't like the spotlight, Naomi, Richard continued. But you need to understand the role you're playing. You're showing people that it's possible to rise above. You're showing them that no matter where you come from, you can make a difference. You don't need to prove yourself to anyone. You've already done that by just being you. Naomi sat in silence, letting Richard's words settle over her. It was as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She had always fought to be seen, but maybe now, she didn't need to fight anymore. Maybe the most powerful thing she could do was simply be herself, to continue the work they had started, and let the impact speak for itself. Over the next few months, the project continued to grow, and Naomi's confidence did too. She stopped worrying about the critics and focused on the people they were helping, the lives they were changing. The young people who had been given a chance, the families who had been lifted out of poverty, the communities that were starting to thrive. It was everything she had hoped for, and more. Richard, too, had grown. He had always been focused on results, on profits, on winning. But now, he had seen firsthand the power of empathy and the importance of giving people a voice. The company began to shift its focus, moving away from pure profit-driven motives to prioritize the well-being of the people they served. The success of the project wasn't just measured in numbers. It was measured in lives changed, in opportunities created, and in the lasting impact they would leave behind. Naomi no longer doubted her place. She had found her purpose, and it wasn't about recognition or praise. It was about making a difference, one person at a time. And as she looked out at the growing movement they had created together, she knew that this was just the beginning. She had learned that real power wasn't about control. It was about empowering others, about giving them the tools they needed to change their own lives. And that was something no amount of money could buy. I never imagined that things would come to this point. Naomi and Richard's collaboration had reached heights neither of them could have predicted. The project they had started together had now expanded into a full-fledged movement. What had begun as a small initiative to help marginalized communities had grown into a nationwide effort, influencing businesses, schools, and entire neighborhoods. They had broken down barriers and created opportunities for people who had once been overlooked. Naomi, once just a flight attendant, had become a symbol of change, of what it meant to rise above the odds. But as the project grew, so did the challenges. The critics who had once whispered about Naomi and Richard were now louder than ever. They questioned their motives, accused them of trying to capitalize on social change for profit, and some even said they were using the cause as a publicity stunt. The pressure was mounting, and Naomi felt it more than anyone. She had never been one for the spotlight. She had never sought fame or recognition. But now, she couldn't escape it. Her every move was being watched, every word she said analyzed, and the weight of it all began to take its toll. Late one night, after a long day of meetings, Naomi sat in her office, staring out the window at the city below. She was exhausted, physically, emotionally, and mentally. She had poured everything into the project, into helping others, but now she was starting to question if it was enough. Was she truly making a difference? Or was she just part of another trend that would fade away in time? Richard could see the toll it was taking on her. He knew that Naomi, despite all the attention, wasn't one to seek the limelight. She had always been someone who preferred to work behind the scenes, quietly making an impact. But now, as the public face of their movement, she had become the target of constant scrutiny. One evening, Richard paid her a visit at her office. When he walked in, Naomi didn't look up from the pile of papers on her desk. He could see the exhaustion on her face, the way she slumped in her chair, as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders. "Naomi," he said, his voice gentle. She looked up, forcing a tired smile. "I'm fine, just a little tired." Richard didn't believe her. He knew the pressure was getting to her, and he wasn't about to let her carry the burden alone. "I've been thinking," he began, "about everything we've accomplished. It's easy to forget why we started this in the first place, isn't it? We didn't do this for the fame or the recognition. We did it because we saw a need, and we wanted to make a difference. The fact that people are talking about it, that they're paying attention, means we're doing something right. But we have to remember, Our work is never going to be easy. There will always be people who doubt us, who question our motives. But that can't stop us. Not now. Not ever. Naomi sat in silence, her hands folded in front of her. She had heard Richard say these things before, but tonight, they felt different. His words weren't just comforting. They were a reminder of why they had started in the first place. It wasn't about them. It was about the people they were helping, the lives they were changing. It was about creating a legacy that would outlast them. You're right, Naomi finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been so focused on the pressure, on what everyone else thinks, that I've forgotten why we're doing this. It's not for the recognition. It's for the people who need it the most. I've spent my whole life trying to prove something to others. Maybe it's time I prove something to myself. Richard smiled, a look of pride crossing his face. You've already proven it, Naomi. Every day, you prove it. And the world is seeing that. In that moment, Naomi realized something important. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She had already made a difference. And she would continue to do so, no matter what the critics said. The project, the movement, they were bigger than her. Bigger than Richard. They were about creating a better world, one step at a time. And that was something no one could take away. As Naomi and Richard stood together, looking out over the city, they knew that their journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. And despite the challenges ahead, they were ready to face them together, stronger than ever. I never expected that the story would take this turn. The challenges Richard and Naomi had faced were only the beginning of a much bigger journey. Naomi had already proven herself, not just to Richard, but to the world. What started as a mission to provide opportunities for the overlooked had evolved into a movement that was reshaping the way people thought about success and power. Yet, as their project expanded, so did the complexities of their work. Naomi had been the driving force behind their initiative, but now, she found herself at a crossroads. The pressures of being in the spotlight had started to weigh heavily on her. She had always been the one behind the scenes, making things happen quietly, but now she was the face of a revolution, the symbol of what was possible when people believed in change. Richard, too, felt the pressure. He had always been the one in control, the one making the big decisions. But this project, this mission, was different. It wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't about the company or the bottom line. It was about people, real lives, and the power to change things for the better. Richard had seen the impact of their work, the real, tangible difference they were making. But he also knew that the journey wasn't over. They had faced opposition before, and now they would face it again. As the project grew, so did the interest in their work. News outlets, social media, and influential people all wanted to know more about Naomi and Richard. What had they done differently? What was the secret to their success? But with that attention came scrutiny. People questioned whether their efforts would last, whether it was just a passing trend or something deeper. Naomi had spent so much of her life being invisible, fighting to be seen, but now that she was seen, she wasn't sure how to handle it. She had never sought the spotlight, never wanted to be famous. But the movement they had created had made her a public figure, and that came with a level of responsibility she hadn't anticipated. Late one evening, as Naomi sat in her office, she found herself lost in thought. The office was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the past few months. Richard had been on a business trip, and Naomi took the time to reflect on everything they had accomplished. She thought about her past, about the woman she had been, the woman she was becoming. She had spent so much time trying to prove her worth, trying to show the world that she mattered. But now, she realized that the true power wasn't in proving something to others. It was in staying true to herself and her mission. As she sat there, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Richard. "We need to talk," it read. Naomi took a deep breath and called him back. "What's up?" she asked, trying to sound calm. Richard's voice on the other end was serious. "Naomi, I think we need to reassess where we are. The project has grown so fast, and while that's incredible, it's also come with some new challenges. There are things we need to discuss." Naomi nodded, even though Richard couldn't see her. She knew what he meant. The critics were out there, and they weren't going to stop. "I know," she said. "It's getting harder to keep up with everything. The pressure, the attention, it's a lot." There was a brief silence on the other end. Then Richard spoke, his voice softer now. "We knew it wouldn't be easy. But you don't have to carry all of this alone. We're in this together, remember?" Naomi smiled, a feeling of relief washing over her. She had always been a fighter, always ready to take on the world. But hearing Richard's words reminded her that she didn't have to do it all by herself. They were partners in this, and together, they could face whatever came next. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "We're in this together." As they talked, Naomi felt a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that the journey they had started was bigger than any one person. It wasn't about her, it wasn't about Richard. It was about the people they were helping, the lives they were changing, and the legacy they would leave behind. The following weeks were a blur of meetings, decisions, and plans for the future. They worked tirelessly, not just to grow the project, but to ensure that it would continue to make a difference for generations to come. Naomi knew there would be more challenges ahead, more people who doubted them, more obstacles to overcome. But now, more than ever, she was ready to face them. Richard had been right all along. It was about staying true to their mission and their values. And with that, Naomi and Richard pushed forward, stronger than ever, knowing that their work had only just begun. As Naomi stood in front of the crowd, the weight of the moment felt almost surreal. The stage was set for the annual gala, and tonight was special. It marked the official launch of their most ambitious project yet. Naomi had come a long way from the days of being an unnoticed flight attendant, serving drinks and carrying trays. Now, she was at the forefront of a movement that was challenging the status quo and making waves across the country. Richard stood beside her, a proud smile on his face as he watched Naomi take the spotlight. Their partnership had grown into something much bigger than either of them had imagined. It wasn't just a business venture anymore. It was a mission, a chance to change the world, one life at a time. Naomi had proven time and time again that she was more than capable. The past months had been filled with triumphs and setbacks. But with every step forward, she had found new strength. She had learned to embrace her role, to trust that the work they were doing was meaningful, and to rise above the critics who had once doubted them. Now, as she faced the crowd, her heart was steady. This was her moment to share their vision, to speak to the people who had supported them and those who would be inspired to join the cause. She took a deep breath, glanced over at Richard, and then began. "Tonight, we stand here not just as individuals or business leaders," Naomi began, her voice steady and strong, "but as part of something much bigger. We are part of a movement that believes in giving everyone the opportunity to succeed, regardless of where they come from or the obstacles they face. It's about lifting each other up, recognizing the value in every single person, and creating a world where no one is overlooked." The room fell silent, and Naomi could feel the weight of the eyes on her. It was a familiar feeling, one she had felt so many times before. But this time, it wasn't the fear of being unseen. It was the power of knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. Richard stood beside her, and for the first time, Naomi realized that their journey was no longer just about the work they were doing. It was about the legacy they were creating. "This project, this movement," she continued, "isn't just about us. It's about all of us, working together to build a future where everyone can thrive. We've seen the difference we can make. We've seen lives transformed, families supported, communities given a voice. And we're just getting started." The applause erupted, and Naomi smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She had never dreamed that she would be standing here, speaking to an audience like this. She had never imagined that her story, her quiet strength, would inspire so many. But it had. And now, as she looked out at the sea of faces, Naomi knew that their work was far from over. Richard stepped forward, joining her at the podium. "Naomi has shown us what true leadership looks like," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "She has proven that power doesn't come from titles or wealth. It comes from the ability to lift others up, to see potential where others see nothing, and to take action when the world needs it the most. We are honored to be part of this journey with her, and we are excited to see where this movement will take us." The crowd cheered once again, but Naomi's thoughts drifted back to where it all began. She thought about the flight, the moment when Richard had underestimated her, and the instant she had realized her own strength. She had never imagined that one moment would set the course for everything that followed. But now, looking at the impact they had made, Naomi understood. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about staying true to herself, her values, and her mission. She had always been capable of making a difference, even when others didn't see it. And now, She was leading the charge for change, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been told they weren't enough. As the night wore on and the gala continued, Naomi felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They had made it this far, and the future was filled with endless possibilities. The movement was only growing, and she knew that the path ahead would be full of challenges. But now, with Richard by her side and the support of so many people who believed in their vision, Naomi felt more ready than ever to face whatever came next. This was just the beginning. The journey had only just begun, and Naomi was ready to continue the fight, for herself, for Richard, and for everyone who needed a voice. This powerful story unfolds as a flight attendant overcomes adversity to become a leader in a transformative movement. Through a series of pivotal moments, Naomi's journey proves that true power lies not in wealth or status, but in quiet strength and empathy. From her humble beginnings to her partnership with a billionaire CEO, Naomi's impact touches lives and reshapes communities. As the movement grows, Naomi and her partner Richard Langston face both support and criticism, proving that the journey for change is never easy. Naomi's rise to prominence offers a fresh perspective on what it means to lead with compassion, showing how the most impactful Black stories are not just about overcoming hardship, but about lifting others along the way. In a world that often overlooks people like Naomi, she emerges as a beacon of hope, showcasing how one individual's determination can change the course of countless lives. This narrative exemplifies the power of Black stories, revealing that greatness is born from resilience, kindness, and the ability to see the potential in others. As Naomi's journey continues to inspire, she becomes more than just a symbol of success. She is the embodiment of the enduring spirit that drives positive change, making her one of the most remarkable figures in modern Black stories.